welcome. My name is Andrea Hardy, and I'm the Director of Customer Success here at TOPS. So in today's agenda, we're going to cover how to set up your TOPS Pro or IQ to really maximize your efficiency, including some best practices, how to utilize your action tables for the entire collection cycle, and then how the global reporting can be used to accelerate your collection management. And truthfully, I know from experience, cut your processing time up to 40%. And then in part two, we're going to go through how to creatively use that reporting to quickly review, post, and process the actions. And then we'll go through how to print multiple account ledgers with ease, which is a cool little feature that I found many years back. So can't wait to share that with you. But first, let's review some best practices to ensure that your collection setup is correct and that you're covering all the necessary steps in the collection cycle. One of my favorite sayings, this phrase is so true among any aspect of our work or personal lives. You know, taking the time to do things and verify and set up your collection process and ensure that you document all the important details is going to not only really save you time, but a lot of headache that are caused by mistakes. So think back to a time when something went drastically wrong, and I bet you can trace it back to an, oh yeah, okay, that's the moment where you realize that a piece of information that was critical was overlooked. Well, my job is to help you prevent this, at least for your collection processing. So let's take a look. Okay, starting at the beginning, when you're transitioning a new community, you know, I went through many failed attempts to get this right in my business, learning two important lessons. The first is that you always have to have a checklist. And the second is to get sign off whenever you're done with that. Because so many things and so many variables can happen, but getting a board member to sign off that everything's correct then just covers you from them coming back later or a new board coming back and wanting to point a finger if something was set up incorrectly. So I didn't realize early on how many details there really are during a transition. And if any of these are set up incorrectly or missed, well, it's Murphy's Law in action. So whatever could have gone wrong did go wrong. So having a checklist that gets utilized every time you transition a new community, it's really just going to protect you from letting those things fall between the cracks and come back to cause chaos. And we know how much work that can be if something's done incorrectly. So to help you out today, you can find the detailed transition checklist that I set up in the handouts. And you'll notice there's multiple tabs that are on this workbook, and they're grouped by department. So there's a lot of information, but the great thing is all you have to do is enter the data on the first sheet and it's going to auto populate to the other ones. So that way less double entry and less, error that could be, avoided. So utilize that great tool that took years and years to compile all that information. So hopefully that's really beneficial for you all. And then my second best practice is, there's always a challenge with collection processing, and I don't know if you're like me, but if you miss one small step, it's going to cause chaos. And you're trying to work through a collection process, someone comes and interrupts you, you come back to it, you forget where you left off. You could miss something critical. Maybe you forgot to download one of the reports or posting deposits, or forgot to apply late fees, or find yourself, later on, or your manager in the hot seat having to explain things to the board if they got overlooked. So quick poll, how many of you have inadvertently missed applying checks or a lockbox download before processing collections? And I'll let you know now, it happened to me more than once or twice. But the amount of work and saving face to make things right was so, just painful. So we know it's not good, so how do we prevent it? Having a checklist for your collections is going to be the first place. So every month, every time we did collections, we would print that out, go through. That way, if you've got more than one hand, doing parts of that collection process, you're going to make sure that things were done, before you start the next one, because there's nothing like missing a posting and sending out late letters on people who weren't really late. Not a big fan of for the homeowners, to call it be angry at you. So, think of it as kind of like a relay. It's going to ensure a smooth handoff from task to task. Okay, now that we are equipped with our checklist, let's ensure that you're utilizing your action table to really get the most from your technology. This one, when I think about it, it seems crazy. How can anyone be expected to process collections on time with, a few associations to, 50 when they're typically all late on the same day? So, if you think about it, you've got 5 or 6 days out of the month where you have to do a majority of your work. Here's the good part. I'm going to show you how. By using some creative solutions, I was able to find a way to process collections for my 15th and for my 30th late dates for all of our communities, and it would typically take 1 to 2 days. So let's show you how you can too. So first thing is really looking at the factors that you need to look at before setting up your collection actions. The most obvious one is the number of days the account has been delinquent. But then the not so obvious ones come into play. So, the amount of the delinquency was one that I struggled with because there wasn't a lot of guidance. So, verify, hey, how much do they have to be behind before we move them on? If they make a partial payment, do they still go to the attorney? What if they only owe $50? I mean, these are the kinds of things. Have a policy, have it in writing so that you can put those in your action tables. And then, looking at your previous collection steps, making sure you don't miss one is a critical thing. And then really looking at your notes and holds. This became, my saving grace for getting through collections was really documenting and utilizing the system for notes and holds. There are a variety of reasons that account's going to be on hold. And what's great is I'm going to show you how to detail that and track it pretty easily. And you can manage these, so much more efficiently. So let's look at how. This is one thing that I created years ago because it helped me explain to everybody kind of what those delinquency action table, categories were. So let's take a quick review. When you're setting up these, they can be utilized to group collection actions based on the table from our previous slide. So first, let's look at how to configure this. The first thing it'll ask you is for the account level, and this is more of an alias. I would tell you to think wisely when you name these. It's a lot like your shorthand for quickly seeing the status of an account when you're reviewing reports. And I can't stress enough to standardize these across all your communities. And what's nice too, you can put them all 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 and make them all the same. And then if you have an association that does something differently, maybe another step in between, you can actually insert a step in between those, make a 15 or a 16, whatever you want to name it. But because Pro limits you to those numbering sequences, make them standardized. It'll save you so much time. And then, using a numerical sequence, like on your delinquency actions, this helps me too, like first notice, second notice, third notice, because if you're like putting a late notice and then a different name, and then sometimes it can get a little confusing. So sometimes it's good to be sequential in how you do the delinquency action naming. And then the minimum days is what will be important to ensure that the system correctly categorizes all the delinquent owners into the right collection category. The really good thing that I noticed over time is it's flexible, so I can come back in here. If half of my people who should have gotten a late notice went into the next action, I would just come back in, delete my file, and go back in and play with the table until I had it where it put everybody where they were supposed to be. That way I made a few tweaks and I could process quickly instead of having to move them all into another one. And then making sure that your thresholds are set up. Again, minimum amounts, determine what they are, put them in there. And if you've got an association that has variable amounts, like condominiums are a good example, then use that minimum percent of assessment, not the minimum amount field. Because that way it's going to be fair across the board. Because if someone owes 100 and someone owes 200, you can't set a $50 minimum balance because then it's not going to be fair. So using that minimum percent of assessment, 10, 20, whatever your board decides. Admin fee, remember, and I've seen many people make this mistake, this is not your late, it's not your interest, it is any amount that you're charging on top of that. So think of it like your administrative fee for processing collections if you do addendum billings or anything of that nature. And then most important is your letter. Again, if you need those template letters, we've got a variety of examples that are already formatted and we're happy to send those to you. But make sure that you assign your template letters to any of the actions that you're actually producing notices for. And I say that because I'm going to show you ways that you can use the action table that won't require a letter to be have to be produced on that. So this is just an example, what the action level looks like, the name, minimum days, and an attachment of a letter. And again, keep in mind, you can change these anytime. I did a lot. So when you fall out of the normal processing timeline, you can go in and make those adjustments, start over the next month, do it again. So now we're going to go into some of the creative ways that you can use this action process. For really special circumstances and owner disputes. So by creating categories for each type of hold, it's going to allow you to see a report on the specifics of why the account is at that stage. And this is especially helpful for payment plan tracking and what I like to call the temporary hold. For those accounts that you need to research or the owner is claiming that we cashed their check, we can put the temporary hold on, but then we know, oh, I need to look at that one next month because it probably should have already been resolved. So quick poll, how many of you are currently using your action table to track these types of situations? And while that is calculating, I will go ahead and move forward. But it looks like a variety of you don't. So this is going to be really helpful. I promise you, totally worth the time in setting up. It's going to save you a lot of time and headache having to research these. So again, I call it creative thinking inside the box because we all know the TOPS Pro little box that pops up. So in this example, I'm going to show you a few tricks that are going to make your table work magic for you. You're going to want to make sure that the actions go in order. This is something I learned the hard way, where the minimum days and the amounts get progressively larger. So don't make the mistake of putting one out of order or it's going to just cause chaos. So what's great is for the actions that you don't want to automatically categorize, for things like your payment plans, holds, you can set the number of days. And I learned a little fact yesterday talking to Mr. Hardy, Jeff Hardy, our founder. He was in our office and I picked his brain on this and he said, oh, you don't have to add those weird minimum days, just use 999 for any of these actions you don't want to automatically categorize. And the system's going to know that that's not supposed to be picked up because those are our placeholders is what we're going to think of that we can use for other stuff. But putting them here is going to allow us to have the power to see all that on reporting. So once we have all that set up, and what's great too, and I want to go back, I didn't mention this, is all those handouts have step-by-step directions on everything I'm covering today. Screenshots and everything you need. One is for Pro, one's for IQ users, small tweak just in the beginning. So go ahead and download those if you haven't already. So now let's look at setting a hold category. So now that we have all this stuff, oh, I can set a payment plan, I can set a temporary hold, I can set an owner dispute, whatever categories you create. And thinking of these as that placeholder in your collection process. Because throughout the month, situations are going to arise. And you're going to need to ensure you don't move these forward through the collection cycle without reviewing the account. So it's our little reminder. So to do this, all you have to do is go to the owner, maintain, and then select the account. And then under the status area, you're going to see the collections drop down, and you'll be able to select whichever one it is, because these are not going to be ones that would work through a collection cycle. They're going to be all throughout the month. Someone calls, there's an issue, you need to put it on hold, but you need a reason why that's easily, accessible. So think of all those things that you're having to track now and create categories for those so that you can just drop down, click it, put it on hold right before that. And then I always found best practice to go to the notes right above and write a quick note about why I put it, at that status, whether, hey, the person's in the hospital and let's give them, 3 more weeks to send payment, or hey, this one, there's a problem with the closing, whatever it is, put your little cheat sheet notes in there. That way you've got something you can reference back to later. Okay, now that we have our action tables ready and they're doing the heavy lifting, now I'm going to tell you why it's critical to not only be prepared, but to really utilize the technology that you have. So I'll go through this. And this was actually one of the reasons that I came to work for TOPS, was that I wanted to help, people like all the businesses that are using TOPS utilize collections better. So I had to do my pitch and do a PowerPoint, and I remember getting the information just the other day off my old slides. So I was explaining that the old way I did things, that were so time consuming, were to print out the delinquency report and descending order, manually look up and review every account status, making multiple edits to the AR screen. And I always noticed they were never in the same order. So I always had to scroll up and down trying to find what I was looking at on a report versus what I was looking at in the edit screen. Then it was harder because I took a lot of questions and I couldn't, provide those answers at the board meetings. So TOPS Pro is really powerful, but with the collections editing, that's really a challenge. So I'm going to show you how you can resolve that. So after many painstaking hours trying to figure out how to improve this process, I discovered the power of global reports. And I'm going to show you how, designing a global report process, which I gave you the blueprint for, will utilize real-time processing collections in conjunction with using Microsoft Excel functions. You can so much more effortlessly manage the collection cycle, have better detailed reporting, and reduce your timing by up to 40% of what you're currently doing. Being more productive is the key to being successful in business these days. So anything you can do to help offload some of that workload is so important. So let's look at how. So as I stated, you can download the step-by-step directions that go through exactly how to run a global report. It's going to let you select only those communities that you want to process collections for. You're going to make 2 or 3 clicks on the screen there and enter your date ranges. And on the date ranges, you really don't have to have a start and end date. It's really just going to pick up. That end date's going to be the most important thing. And then you're going to process. And then it may take a while, depending on how many communities you have, how much data's in there. So I would sometimes have it start up at night, and then I'd come back in the morning and my reports would be there, because we'd be running 20, 30 reports at the same time. But what's great is one click, you're going to be able to pull all your data into an Excel format. So once it's done processing, you'll be able to select a standard owner listing. I know it doesn't say anything about collections. I stumbled onto this one and realized that it just had an amazing amount of data that was really beneficial for collections. And from there, you have to save it to your computer, open it. It does do it in a CSV file. So I would open it, save it right to an Excel file. Then you can start editing. And then, there's going to be some columns that you need to remove. There's more data than you need, but everything that I'm going to show you in the directions will give you all the information you need. And then I'm going to show you later how you can use that to really power through filtering and knock out, all the collections across as many communities as you're doing in that same day. So Before we go into how we're going to use those reports, I want to mention a really cool feature that I found, that when I set it up, that it lets you skip the formatting of the reports to automatically remove unnecessary columns and data. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, what's a macro? That sounds scary. Well, it's really a handy feature that Excel has that lets you automate repetitive tasks. And it's pretty simple. You just record it one time, and then every time you run that same report, it's in the exact same format. You can click that button and it'll run that same formatting every time. So it really is beneficial for, you know, taking out the extra steps. 5-10 minutes, but if you add that up over 2 or 3 cycles times months and months and months, I like to take everything, you know, that takes time away from what you have to do. Now, depending on what version of Excel that you use, I would recommend, you know, go into Google. Google's your friend. Search for the version of Microsoft on Google and get the directions on how to record a macro. You'll only need to format it once for it to work. So totally worth it and saves you a lot of time moving forward. So now that we have all this great data, let's review how to use it to your advantage. If you've been managing payment plans and other hold categories like we reviewed earlier, now is going to pay off big, and I'm going to show you why. If you're trying to do collections for even for one community, this is very beneficial, but imagine 25 of them at the same time. You've got the power of advanced sorting in Excel, so you can prep these really quickly and efficiently. The first step that I really suggest, and again, don't be overwhelmed, lots of directions once you download those. But when I would open mine, I thought, well, what's the most important thing I need to do first? And that would be looking at those hold accounts. So to make them stand out more, you know, easily, I would sort the workbook, and it doesn't matter what community, I would sort it by the hold flag status and highlight them all bright yellow. That way, when I went back to looking at the data on a community by community basis, those would stand out like a sore thumb, and I would instantly know, oh, I gotta follow up on that one and take a look and make sure they made the payment or make sure that the check was received, whatever the reason they're on hold. And then I'm gonna tell you another little tip too. If you have properties where an owner owns multiple units, one thing that used to happen to us a lot was they'd send in the payment for 5 units with 1 coupon, and it would all get applied to 1. So a great thing with this too is you can sort it by name, by last name, and then quickly look down and see if there's any credit balances next to someone who owes it on the same owner. So then you'd be able to go, oh, you know what? We applied it to the wrong account, or they sent in the wrong information. But quick way to check it before you have to, you know, the hassle of them calling you back. And another thing too is don't let your owners do that. If they do that, send them a note, that form letter that says you must provide, you know, an individual statement or coupon with every one of your payments, or give us a list. Write it on your checks and in the note, whatever it is. Don't send us one check and let us think that we have to figure out where to apply those dues. Got to train your owners just like that. So let's move on to really getting the most of your data. So I call this the perfect sort order. You know, I learned Excel over years, just trial and error, but I found this feature that lets you sort by multiple options to put the data into what I call the perfect sort order for doing collections. And again, all you do, and the directions go through it, is you highlight your workbook data, have a little box that clicks that says sort, and there's this option called custom sort. So we would want to then look at it by first community. That way you've got a list, and it's going to have your community ID, so you know where you are. Then you want to look at, you know, how much do they owe? I want it the largest balance to the smallest. Then I want to know whether they're on collections next. And then lastly, I want to know what collection action did we do last time. That way everything is in this workbook, easy to read, easy to look through. And the great thing about Excel is you can add a little comment for notes and next actions. So that's a really powerful tool to be able to look at. And I used these workbooks that I would, you know, process my collections with. I realized afterwards, I'm like, this is great. This is a great board report. It has all the details. That way no one has to ask me a question. So although it may seem a little, confusing at first, once you run through this with the directions the first time and start to really get used to it, you're going to realize, wow, this is so powerful and it's going to save me so much time. So once I have all that data and I've sorted it in my perfect sort order, now I can just quickly review and ensure that all of the holes, are accounted for. So first thing I'll do is look at the whole categories for my payment plans. Make sure they made a payment. If they didn't, I can remove the hold and proceed with a letter of default. I'm sure a lot of you have to hold accounts for a pending sale of a home because you can't go in and move them to collections because you've already provided the paperwork. But then sometimes those fall into a no man's land, and you've got to keep up with how long have we had that out there, and did the sale go through? So a good rule of thumb is to allow up to 90 days for the paperwork to be received. But if it's past 90 days, probably best bet to call and determine if the sale even went through. That way you can kick it off of the hold status and move forward. Again, it's great for managing those accounts in bankruptcy so that you can review and make sure that the post-bankruptcy agreement is being adhered to, that payments didn't go to the pre instead of the post accounts that you're setting up in there. However you're managing it, it's just another way that you can really, stay on top of it. And again, for those temporary, I like to call it temp holds, that you can just use as a bucket to throw all the other types of situations where you just need to hold it for a little while. That's where those notes come in handy. All right, now you have your super report, as I like to call it. Let's review how you can quickly review, edit, and post your collection actions. So that was the prep work. Now this is where it comes into action. So most of the time, you will always choose the actions for all what I like to call internal and attorney actions to process. And if you're not tracking your attorney actions in this, just like the holds, do it, all of it, because you're always going to be working through the attorney accounts. So if you're the one pushing all the information out, it's a great thing to be able to do that all through the collection process. And what I found really helpful too is if you're doing the attorney accounts and it's going to show on the reports like attorney demand or notice of lien, I always put the word requested after it. That way they didn't think that it had already been completed. I requested an attorney demand. Doesn't mean that the attorney has done it right then. So that way they know, you know what, I've done my job. Now it's in the hands of our attorney. So make sure that, with the example that we have, that you've got, your internal notices, your attorney notices, or I should say collection actions. And then after that, you'll have all your hold categories where you're going to have your 999. I don't know if this is 100% valid, but I ran into the problem where if I didn't have a letter attached, that it didn't pick them up. So I didn't want to print a letter because it's not something I'm doing, but I want to post the action. So I found a way to do that through creating a form letter in Tops Pro, but not putting any data in it. I named it blank do not use, and I used it on everything, and it's ironic. It doesn't print anything, and it posts them all perfectly. So if you want to post attorney actions, you want to post other things that you're not actually sending a letter out, you can trick the system by using that blank option. Creative thinking, that's the only way we can do it. And then one great tip that we'll go through as we're walking through this, I've done this so many times where if you categorize the information and then you go to edit those and you realize most of your people are not in the right category, it's a pain to move them all. Just go back here and you're going to see that little area that says clear work file. Click that and it's your start over button. Then you can go back, edit that action table again on the setup and adjust those minimum days. If it's, because you can adjust those. I always gave like a little grace period, but if you want to roll them back a couple of days or move them forward a couple of days, whatever works for you, because you can do it over and over until you get everybody in the right category. That way you don't have to spend time moving them. And then once you're done categorizing, This worked for me, so I would love to hear feedback, but I always found that I needed to use the forced delinquent owners to work correctly. If I use the categorize on the collection table, for some reason, I had issues. So if I use that force, it somehow magically put everybody in the right category, as long as my parameters were set up right. So now that I've done that, I'm opening my edit. This is where those reports are, a godsend, because, doing collections in Pro, the sort order is an account number, but you notice what's not on the screen, the account number. So this made reviewing the order more challenging. But the great thing is, with your global report, sort an account number, and then it's all going to be exactly the same. Then you can just go one by one real quick, and quickly verify that everybody's on there, knock off anybody you don't need. And another tip is you can use that for your late fee processing. So if you've got accounts on hold and you don't want to do a late fee, works just as well on that side. So with that global report, quickly roll through these instead of trying to find each candidate. It is a major time saver. Okay, now let's look at the post-collection action and how to process your notices. So when you've done all of your edits and you're ready to post the collection actions, so once you post, you can print the collection letters and the collection report. And I always did a quick check to verify that the number that was on the report is the number of letters that I had. Just a fail safe to make sure, because every once in a while there would be an odd thing where one of the letters wasn't in there. Maybe they got put on hold and I accidentally missed it. So just another checklist that you can follow up on. So if I posted 10 late letters, I would go into the report, look, make sure I had 10 in my PDF that I would save. And then another really handy thing was when I would post my collection actions, I would do the attorney actions separately. That way I had a quick report that I would just email over to the attorney. Here's the people I want to move forward. Here's the different actions, because it'll show them on the posting report, whether it's an attorney demand, whether you're asking for a notice of lien. Just one more thing you can do so you don't have to go through it one by one and update them. So now that you have all your notices, it may be required by your state or just a best practice to send a copy of the owner's payment history with the notice. So instead of spending time going into every account and printing those, I'm going to show you a quicker way to get the account histories in a lot fewer clicks. So if you go to the enhanced bills module, you're probably accustomed to using this only for statements, for your invoicing. But I want to show you how you can use this feature for account ledgers. A couple of reasons why this is awesome. First is, you can select the statement option layout, just like you would, configuring any other invoicing. But the difference is you're going to ensure the start date is at least a year prior to the bill or to the date you're going to do these. So that way you're getting a full year's history. And I did this for the accounts that I sent out a letter that, hey, you're going to go to the attorney if you don't pay. I knew that, that they wouldn't be at least over a year past due. So I knew I was going to encompass where they got behind on that 1 year. That's kind of what I used as an earmark. But you can go back further if you need to. And then make sure that you include the balance forward and the balance breakdown selections. And then I found a great way, to use the message areas like, hey, you have this many days to pay or else you're going to move forward with collections. But what's really great about this is when you print them out, you can utilize, the ability to have a tear off statement or a coupon so that they can mail those in and you don't have to get them in-house and process them. And then on the next screen, it goes through the print order. Make sure it's the same print order as your notices, so you can easily just pull them off, match them up. And then under select recipients, you're going to click the process for drop down, and the key here is the selected homes, because that's going to let you choose, whichever ones that you want to include. And then on this page, first thing you need to do is, this is where you're picking all your owners, is I learned this the hard way. Down at the bottom, there's a filter. You want to have it not include previous owners. So just click the drop down, click current owners. That way you don't inadvertently pick a previous owner. And now, once you do that, all you have is your current owners. Make sure your sort order on your report is in the same order as the account order, and you can just click, 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 click down the line of the ones that you need. And then you're finished, you can just click next and print only, because you're going to be printing these for mailing. And boom, you're done. And you'll have a full file of all the statements, and you can just click to process, print those, or you can save them to a PDF. And it's great because having the history, you know, in this format, lets you send it with a notice that they're receiving, and then they can tear it off, mail in payment without having to mail it back to you and have to manually enter it. And again, all these directions are in the attachment. So I'd love to hear some feedback from you all if you utilize this, you know, on like what your time savings are, and, you know, or any other creative ways that you've used the system and used our technology for your collections. Now I'm going to move on to the questions and answers part, and I'm going to ask my wonderful team on the other side to read them for me, because I am, like I said, I'm not good at seeing the small box on the screen. Let me open those up. All right, I see some of them that have already been answered.
Yeah, Andrea, we actually have no questions yet. I think you did such a good job on the presentation that there's no questions. Are there any questions from the group? If so, feel free to include them in the questions portion.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, just lastly, I want to say thank you all for attending. We appreciate you taking the time, and, you know, our goal is to help you to be more successful. So always let us know. We love your feedback, and thank you again for attending.